everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome.
44 of the Standing Committee of Environment and Sustainable Development. This is a public meeting. For those in person, please remember to follow the health and safety guidelines for your microphones to prevent audio or feedback incidents for our translators. We are commencing our day's study on single-use plastics prohibition regulations today. And we have two sets of witnesses for the first hour. Here we have Dr. Chelsea Rockman, Assistant Professor of the University of Toronto. We have Scott Thurlow, Senior Advisor, Government Affairs of Dow Canada. And we have Dr. Peter Ross, Senior Scientist of Raincoast Conservation Foundation. Each witness will have 5 minutes to present some opening statements. I do have a little timed sign to warn you when you're at a minute, and when you're out of time, please wrap up. We'll use that throughout the session. And we will begin with Dr. Rockman. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Miedema and Vice Chairs Ross and Bonin, for the invitation. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share my expertise. My name is Chelsea Rockman, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Toronto. I have been researching plastic pollution for nearly 20 years. My research is widely known for increasing our understanding of the prevalence, the persistence, and ecological effects of plastics in the environment. I study plastic debris globally, including here in the Great Lakes, as well as in the Canadian Arctic. I'm often asked to advise governments on the issue of plastics in the environment. This includes the United Nations and every level of government in both the United States and here in Canada. I recently co-led a working group on monitoring and risk for the International Joint Commission, a binational organization created by Canada and the U.S. to protect our resources and boundary waters, including in the Great Lakes. Today, I will focus on the evidence demonstrating that plastic pollution is ubiquitous, persistent, and harmful. Plastic pollution is increasing, and if we want to protect wildlife, we must focus on waste reduction, which is a proven solution. According to the Government of Canada, we lost 90,000 tons of plastics to the environment in 2019, which is equivalent to 53 million garbage bags of plastic waste, a figure predicted to increase 19% by 2040. In Toronto, I can tell you a bit about what I see. I supervise students who clean and monitor plastic floating in our harbor. They cover about a 2-kilometer stretch of the waterfront. Every year, we remove hundreds of thousands of pieces of plastic from the water, and the most common items we see are single-use plastics, including food wrappers, straws, plastic bags, bottle caps, and cigarette filters. Although we clean a lot, we don't make a dent. Cleanup will not solve this problem, and we are currently failing to keep Toronto's waters clean. Toronto's Don River is among the most urbanized in Canada. We estimate this river contributes roughly tens of thousands of plastic items plus 500 billion microplastics, defined as 1 micron to 5 millimeters in size, into Lake Ontario annually. And downstream, the fish have the highest levels of microplastics reported globally. Microplastics are in every fish that we sample from Lake Ontario as part of the government's sport fish program. That's every fish. The weight of evidence about the effects of microplastic has grown quite a bit. There is no doubt that microplastics can harm organisms. Scientists now have enough data to synthesize toxicity results into risk assessments. Most recently, within the International Joint Commission, we quantified the risk of microplastics to the Great Lakes. Based on our findings, our group of scientists and policymakers recommended that microplastics be listed as a chemical of mutual concern under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Across the lakes, there is a consistent release of plastic. It is ubiquitous, it's persistent, and it is found at concentrations that cross risk thresholds. Related to this, plastic manufactured items fit the definition of toxic under SEPA, which states that a substance is toxic if it enters the environment in a concentration or under conditions that may have a harmful effect. Plastic manufactured items break down into microplastics in the environment, but moreover, whole plastic manufactured items cause harm at amounts we see in nature. Animals eat plastic items such as bottle caps, straws, and bags, and this can cause injury or death. We recently published a quantitative risk assessment in a top scientific journal measuring how much plastic is too much for seabirds, turtles, and marine mammals. Plastic ingestion has been documented in every seabird family, every marine mammal family, and every sea turtle species. Based on necropsy data, our model predicts the amount of plastic that is nearly certain to kill an animal. For seabirds, plastic waste in the volume of 1 to 2 marbles will almost certainly be lethal. For turtles, the number is about 1 to 2 baseballs, and for whales, 1 to 7 basketballs. If you are a smaller animal, death can occur from a smaller load. Just 1 bottle cap can kill a seabird. There is risk to wildlife from the amounts we observe in nature, and thus the current state of the science supports managing plastic under SEPA. Since Canada started to address plastic pollution seriously, we have quickly risen as a global leader due to Canada's comprehensive policies aimed at reducing plastic waste and pollution, which includes the ban on a handful of single-use plastic items and microbeads in rinse-off personal care products. Since the ban on microbeads, their presence has plummeted in Great Lakes water samples. Since the single-use plastic ban, the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup reports a decline in every single one of these items. Reducing single-use plastic that are common in the environment, are not practically reusable or recyclable, and that have a substitution is a key part of the transition to a circular economy. It also protects the environment. The scientific evidence supports staying the course, continuing to be a leader, and enforcing the current policies already in place. Thank you. Be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rockman. We will now turn to Mr. Thurlow for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is my pleasure to be here today to speak on the issue of plastic and plastic waste. The Dow Chemical Company was founded by Herbert H. Dow, a Canadian-born industry pioneer, native of Mr. Millet's riding, born in Belleville, Ontario. Today, Dow is one of the world's leading material science companies, serving customers in high-growth markets such as packaging, infrastructure, mobility, and consumer applications. We operate manufacturing sites in 29 countries and employ over 30,000 people around the world. Dow Canada is headquartered in Calgary and has manufacturing facilities in Alberta and Ontario. As you may have heard, in 2021, Dow announced the expansion of our Fort Saskatchewan facility. That expansion will triple the production of our polyethylene and derivatives. In so doing, we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and we will be net zero from a Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions perspective. That expansion is generously supported by the federal, provincial, and municipal governments and is already creating thousands of construction jobs. Dow has been at the forefront of Canada's approach to plastic and plastic waste since the very beginning. As we have articulated before many other parliamentary committees, the approach that the federal government has used to date has been to use the wrong act to solve the wrong problem, doing it the wrong way. Plastic is not toxic, and we verily believe that the use of the toxic substances provisions of SEPA is inappropriate. We have never wavered from that position. The best way to ensure plastic remains in the economy is to incentivize greater recycling rates for materials after use. We believe that government policy can create demand for products with recycled content, and we remain committed to a recycled content standard for all plastic packaging. We strongly believe that creating a market for post-consumer plastic is the best way to ensure that it is returned to the economy and not permanently orphaned in a landfill or escape into the environment. No one is going to argue that fugitive plastic waste entering the environment isn't a problem, but to think of post-consumer use plastic as waste is a missed opportunity. Through chemical conversion, industry can depolymerize post-consumer plastics and return those molecules to the economy. Transitioning to a circular economy is not only vital to the preservation and protection of our planet's natural resources, but it's also critical to the business successes of Dow. As we transform to a circular economy, we are taking into account a product's life cycle, from creation to use to disposal, in everything we do and create. We are taking a leading role in driving a more circular economy by designing for circularity and building new business models for circular materials. Dow believes that public policy will be a critical enabler of successfully establishing a circular economy. Smart policies, as well as partnerships, can help drive innovation and accelerate the adoption and expansion of advanced recycling to complement traditional recycling. Policy should be promoting advanced and chemical recycling alongside other recycling technologies. This is essential to resolving the issue of hard-to-recycle substances in products. No policy should deselect approaches that can best prevent plastic from being recovered and placed back into the economy. We believe we need to invest in the waste management infrastructure to improve the supply chain and enable advanced recycling technology approaches. We believe that this should begin with a more favorable tax status for industry investments in all stages of the materials ecosystem. We have recommended that private actions that support the expansion of the waste infrastructure be supported by favorable tax treatment like an accelerated capital cost allowance so that the work of the private sector can be encouraged to be incorporated into the work that provinces and municipalities do every day. Every dollar that industry spends throughout the materials ecosystem is a dollar that the government does not have to spend dealing with post-consumer plastic. In conclusion, the government should be looking at waste infrastructure the same way that they are looking at our trade infrastructure and our transportation infrastructure. It's critical for the economy to succeed and grow. I would welcome the committee's questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thurlow. We will now turn to Dr. Ross for 5 minutes. Over to you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for inviting me today. I've been studying plastic and microplastic pollution for the past 20 years in Canada, during which time I worked as a federal scientist at Fisheries and Oceans Canada, at the Vancouver Aquarium, Oceanwise, and now at Raincoast Conservation Foundation. I'm a toxicologist, which means I'm concerned about the impacts of chemicals and pollutants on the well-being of Canadians and Canadian wildlife. For 4 decades, I've studied a variety of pollutants in killer whales, beluga whales, harbor seals, salmon, shellfish, and in air, water, and sediments. I've worked with First Nations across Canada to look at the safety of Indigenous foods. Most of what I've studied have been chemical in nature: PCBs, dioxins, PBDEs, pesticides, hydrocarbons, metals, including mercury, among others. So plastics have emerged as kind of a unique pollutant in my world, a structural pollutant, a pollutant of obviously widespread scientific, public and policy concern, a pollutant where every piece or particle is nearly unique in shape, size, and formulation. Think, as Canadians might, of a snowflake, where we've got an infinite number of structures. This complexity in this pollutant class renders the technical characterization of plastics and microplastics challenging, but also offers incredible opportunities for scientific research, advances, information exchange, and innovation. I'd like to summarize a few points below that reflect my professional perspective on the topic of plastics and microplastics. Firstly, as has been shared today, plastics and microplastics have been widely detected throughout Canada's 3 oceans as well as in freshwater and terrestrial environments. Plastics and microplastics kill fish and wildlife. They are toxic. They can cause entanglement of whales, turtles, seabirds, seals. They can suffocate. They can starve through artificial satiation. Plastics and microplastics are pervasive and persistent pollutants. They do not break down chemically during our lifetimes, but they break up into smaller and smaller pieces, such that every piece of large plastic is a reservoir of future microplastics. They can be found in the air we breathe today from this polyester carpet, the water we drink, and the food we eat. The plastic pollution problem is only getting worse each and every day. Global plastic production is doubling every 10 to 15 years. Shoreline or ocean cleanups are useful for data and education, but are an ineffective band-aid for the growing plastic pollution problem. Recycling systems, despite the best intentions of municipalities, provincial agencies, fail to collect the vast majority of plastic waste in Canada. Additives, colors, and chemical formulations, including endocrine-disrupting compounds, prevent a safe and circular plastics economy. The majority of plastics in our blue bins end up either in landfills or in dead-end products, such as park benches, carpets, or curtains. This means that recycling entails, generally speaking, a maximum of 2 uses for virgin plastic. Remember the stubby? 44 uses for the beer bottle that we used to use in Canada. Third major point this morning, plastic pollution comes from all of us. We are all polluters. But fishing and aquaculture sector remains an important source of plastics in the ocean, representing probably half the floating plastics in the Pacific right now. Millions of fibers from clothes, much of this polyester, are shed with each laundry. And this is something we've detected in seawater throughout the Arctic Ocean, with even 47 microfibers under the water at the North Pole. These are coming from textiles and laundry. Municipal wastewater treatment reduces but does not eliminate discharge into our waterways with the microplastics retained in biosolids now being spread on our farmers' fields. They're not destroyed by wastewater treatment. Single-use packaging from restaurant customers, recreational users, and travelers can be found on our streets and shorelines. This is something that every child can tell us about and that we all do our best to avoid. Plastic packaging accounts for approximately 47% of plastic waste in Canada. This is ending up largely in landfills. That's 1.4 million tons per year. More than 86% of plastic waste ends up in landfills. And during my 25 years of working on plastic, these numbers have not changed substantially, barring a few low-hanging fruit items that my esteemed colleague, Dr. Rockman, spoke to. I believe, as Dr. Rockman presented, that Canada is well positioned for further global leadership. My time is up. I will wrap up. My apologies, Madam Chair. Canada's supper regulations have directly led to less plastic litter. Canada's addition of plastic manufactured items to the domestic substances list allows Ottawa to identify further products. I think Canada can further strengthen its leadership through the following: innovation and research in material sciences, textile designs, and wastewater treatment, facilitating national knowledge exchange through working groups, conferences, consultations, strengthening research capacities through interlaboratory calibration and other exercises, encourage home source controls through updated appliance standards, consumer education, and so forth, strengthening the market value, as my esteemed colleague to my left had emphasized, and the food safety of recycled plastics through the labeling of plastic formulations for additives and dyes, and continuing to build a national recycling framework through the leadership of the CCME to encourage municipalities and provinces to get on board in a national way that would improve the marketability and the circular economy. And finally, Madam Chairman, to consider the value of braided Western science and the importance and the important contribution of Indigenous knowledge. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ross. We will now go to questions by committee members, and we will begin with Mr. Leslie for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thurlow, the government still has not explained the basic contradiction here. I'm wondering if you can. If a product is considered toxic enough to ban for use for everyday Canadians, why is it acceptable to manufacture it in Canada and send it across the border?
I'm afraid you're going to have to ask the minister that question because I can't answer it.
So we're heading into, as long as we don't screw it up before we start, renegotiations on CUSMA. Has the United States ever raised Canada's plastics policy broadly, or including this specific toxic designation or export rules as a trade irritant?
So every year, the USTR trade representative puts out a report about the global trade irritants around the world. In their most recent report, they very specifically pointed to Canada's plastic waste agenda as something that was a trade irritant. And you may or may not know that the current CUSMA has a chapter that's dedicated to plastic management and plastic waste. So it's certainly something the United States has mentioned. They've gone so far to say that the proposed reductions to food packaging and packaging compostability requirements could compromise food safety, increase food loss and waste, and restrict U.S. agricultural exports. So yes, they have identified this as a trade irritant.
Thank you. Now, in your opening remarks, I think echoed by all the witnesses, this is about what do we do once the plastic is here. So instead of relying on a blanket toxic designation and bans, what in your assessment would be more practical way to reduce plastic waste without punishing the actual manufacturers in Canada?
So industry has long argued in favor of a recycled content mandate, and a recycled content mandate is the requirement that a certain percentage of the plastic come from non-virgin resources. So doing will create a market for that product. It will allow for industry to make targeted investments based on the existence of the rule. They could go to their financiers and say, we now have a rule that says that we have to do this. Please give us the funding on favorable terms so that we can build the infrastructure that we need to do that. That is precisely how the Canadian Renewable Fuels Network was created under Prime Minister Harper's government. There was an amendment to SEPA that very specifically spoke to the composition of the fuels. Investments happened as a direct result of those fuels, and it was a legislative amendment and then a subsequent regulatory requirement that allowed for that renewable fuels industry to grow. We would tell you that the same growth would happen in the recycling industry.
So you mentioned, so I mean, we were looking at the stick approach here. That is, I think, part of the carrot. You also mentioned tax treatment. Could you identify specifically what the carrots would be for industry that would the government should consider to help reduce plastic waste and improve the overall recycling system?
Certainly. So we've long argued for tax incentives to help facilitate investments in what we describe as the materials ecosystem. And we're not fussy about it. We just want to make sure that there is credit that is provided for things that are investments to the manufacturing process to encourage a design for circularity. We are interested in tax credits for consumer and business education about how the product gets back into this circular economy. Collecting, cleaning, sorting, mechanical recycling, the creation of the facilities for chemical recycling, and then, any development of more sustainable feedstocks as well. All of these things are part and parcel of part of the solution that can help reduce the amount of resin that gets back into the waste cycle.
You mentioned the need for a recycling content plan of some sort for plastic packaging. What model, either that's already being tried, tested internationally, but more specifically made in Canada, what model would work in Canada in your assessment?
So again, I would tell you that something that has the force of law at the federal level that would encourage investments based on the issue of concern, which is collection, distribution, repurposing, all of those things in that same life cycle. Something that has a rule, that has the force of law, and then there is a corresponding financial incentive to make those investments.
So obviously the benefit of that is keeping plastics out of the environment, but what would the spin-off economic benefits possibly be? I assume a supply chain would need to be developed and better handle all of this excess waste being diverted correctly into a recycled system.
So right now we have multiple different supply chains, and I will say that British Columbia does it the best. British Columbia has somewhat of a unified system where the rules are the same in all the municipalities. But I think once you get away from individual municipalities deploying their relatively meager resources at different problems, and you have kind of a galvanized effect of everyone rowing in the same direction to create a similar type of infrastructure, you will absolutely see spin-off benefits from that. I mean, the better the system is at reclaiming and repurposing these materials, the less virgin materials have to come out of the ground. Like, that has a different economic impact, but there's also a value that's added through each stage of that process.
So just to clearly juxtapose, the ban, it doesn't seem to be working versus an opportunity for a domestic market of enhanced players within the game here that could both achieve environmental goals while also enhancing the ability to reuse these existing products. Is that correct, or can you sum it up better than that?
I couldn't agree more. I think that a comprehensive product ban has not been demonstrated to solve the problem. We would much rather have something that is a much more comprehensive approach and isn't, pardon the pun, whacking a mole one at a time.
Mr. Leslie, we will now turn to Mr. Greaves online for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. My first question is for Dr. Ross. Thank you for joining us today, sir. And in particular, thank you for your contributions to the study of our ecosystems and water systems in southern British Columbia, in particular, highly relevant experience that informs our discussion and our study today. I'd like to drill into this question of the economic impacts of plastics. As we were just hearing, we're often presented with the argument about the negative environmental impacts of regulating plastics in various ways, But from a differing perspective, and as a representative of a coastal community that has millions of visitors come every single year, we see the way in which plastic pollutions on our coastline and in our waters is actually an economic threat to one of our core industries in the visitor economy. And I would suggest that that's true not just on Vancouver Island, but everywhere that we have beautiful coastlines in this country, whether that's elsewhere on the BC coast, whether that's in Grossmoor National Park in Newfoundland, whether that's the Bow River in Alberta, or indeed on the shores of Lake Ontario. So in that context, Dr. Ross, I'm wondering if you could speak to the volume of plastic pollution that we have in our waterways and any comments you could offer about the economic harms that plastic pollution causes to our local and regional economies.
Thank you, through the chair, to Mr. Reeves. That's a great question. I mean, whenever we look at a pollutant, we look at the potential for harm to fish, wildlife, and human health. And in coastal British Columbia, where our Indigenous communities are relying on aquatic foods, consuming on average 15 times as much seafood as the average Canadian, we remain concerned that the microplastics and plastics that are either killing fish and wildlife or getting eaten by fish and wildlife that are then consumed by First Nations represent a significant setback to our attempts at reconciliation. So assuring food safety for Indigenous communities, I think, is a preeminent interest of ours. To the point about the effectiveness of supper in this context, I do note that the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup has documented significant declines in the number of plastic bags and straws on Canadian shorelines, to the tune of 60% straw reduction and 25% less bags. So these are large amounts of plastic. But again, the single-use plastic regulations only target 3% of the total plastic waste entering Canadian waterways, so that we suffer from continued blights on our shorelines that are a problem for tourism. And in BC and on the East Coast, we have whales that are entangled in fishing gear, most of this being plastic. So there are significant impediments to the health and well-being of wildlife, at-risk species such as the southern resident killer whales that are endangered and number only 74 individuals, and food safety for all Canadians. So tourism, food safety, Indigenous food security, these all have significant threats to their well-being, and obviously have bearing on economic well-being for those communities, or the communities relying upon them.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Ross. You anticipated my next question, so I'd like to just drill in on the connection between land, rivers, the seas and oceans that surround us, and marine life. As you're aware, for our community here in Victoria, our urban and rural watersheds are directly tied to the health of the Salish Sea, and as you mentioned, the southern resident orcas, as well as salmon populations which inhabit those waters, are really inseparable from our way of life and many aspects of culture and identity on the BC coast. In that context, could you please explain how plastic pollution from inland watersheds is compounding the challenges facing these species in critical marine habitats, and specifically what targeted interventions at the watershed level would yield the greatest benefit for cleaner oceans and waters for all of us?
Through the chair, thank you very much for that. Dr. Rochman will be able to complement my any response that I might offer, but I will say that in general terms, we feel as though 80% of ocean pollution come from land-based activities. And there's no question that plastics and microplastics are entering waterways throughout our terrestrial environments and paddling to the sea. They're heading down to sea, where we suffer the consequences. In terms of sources of microplastics in particular, we're very concerned about wastewater treatment plants that discharge liquid effluent that contains microplastics. In Vancouver, we have 5 major wastewater treatment plants. One of those, the largest one, releases an estimated 30 billion particles of plastic every single year, and that represents less than 5% of the microplastics that enter the plant. That means that 95% of the microplastics, much from our clothing, we lose 10 million fibers every time we wash a single load of laundry, and that enters the wastewater stream. So 95% of those fibers are retained as solid waste and redistributed under federal policy, under CCME policy, and under provincial legislation as biosolids. They're spread onto farmlands and for mining reclamation and in silviculture. Those plastics are not degraded. So we now have microplastics throughout our farms, and they will ultimately drain slowly but steadily into our waterways where they can affect spawning salmon and other wildlife downstream. So big sources on land absolutely associated with our activities as humans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greaves. Maintenant, je passe la parole à Monsieur Bonin pour 6 minutes.
Now, Mr. Bonin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Thurlow, how many employees do you have in Canada?
1,200.
Sorry, 1,200 Dow employees, and then there are several thousand people who are on site building the new facility.
OK. Et combien d'employés au Canada travaillent?
And how many employees in Canada work directly with plastic production?
The committee with an answer on that, but I would assume that it's the overwhelming majority of them.
OK. Fait que, oui, si vous pouvez nous revenir, ça serait apprécié.
So if you could come back to us with that, it would be appreciated. What's the percentage of plastic that you're producing that's coming from fossil fuels?
So in Canada right now, it is almost 100%,
Okay.
because we're in the process of transitioning.
Et ce sont quoi les...
And what are the greenhouse gases related to the production of the oil and the...
Very different.
Aujourd'hui, les émissions sont très différentes que ce sera en 2030. Ça sera zéro.
So again, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it is available in the National
Super,
Pollutant Release Inventory.
vous nous reviendrez là-dessus, merci. Vous parlez de...
You'll come back to us about that. So you're talking about chemical recycling and you want funds for that. Could you give us information about the process that you're talking about? Who are the buyers? What are the emissions and the pollutants? Could you please give us that information?
And I'm happy to do my very best to give the committee useful information on
Ce serait
that.
apprécié d'avoir des chiffres là-dessus, merci.
We'd appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Ross, you've been talking about recycling. Are we still at only 9% of plastic that's recycled in Canada? Yes, almost 9%, barely 9% of plastic. And because Canada is part of the coalition of high ambitions in the World Treaty for Plastics, that coalition, of which Canada's a member, speaks of the importance of reducing production. Do you share the opinion that it's important to decrease pollution? It's not through recycling only. No, the recycling is not working very well in Canada. I think we all agree on that. It's barely 9%. So the figure hasn't changed over 20 years. We have small successes here and there, but recycling does not work very well. And that's in part caused by the fact that virgin plastic is cheaper than plastic that's been recycled. So that's a challenge. Secondly, if we want food-safe packaging, sellers prefer plastic that's secure. If a recycled product appears, they don't know if there are chemical products within that. That's a second challenge. And so what do we do? I would say that a cap on plastic production, to my mind, is the only way of avoiding continuous production of pollution in our coastal waters. But I agree entirely with my colleague on my left that an improved system for recycling is absolutely important in Canada. It's not all, but it's important. So you're talking about a cap, but what I see in the coalition of great ambition is a reduction of production, because otherwise we're talking about doubling production over 20 years. Do you agree that we have to decrease production at the source and also promote reuse before even talking about recycling? Plastic is two things. First of all, it's useful, and secondly, it's a pollutant. So we have to support the value of plastic that we have in our economy, so improve the value of that plastic. So with products that are recycled, you have to have labeling that allows us to know what the ingredients are, the components are. I don't want to see tens of thousands of formulas where we don't have the possibility of knowing if it's safe for bottles or hot dog wrappers, etc. So the first thing to do is to have a ban on single-use plastics. Yes, that is a goal that's quite ambitious or aggressive. But if 47% of plastic pollution comes from these wrappers, it's something that we should target. But I'll say, in addition, that these days there's so much innovation in Canada, and we don't have any representatives here who are giving evidence on the value of the alternatives. There are all kinds of them. All kinds of alternative materials can be used. They contribute to the Canadian economy and to environmental protection. Could you provide the committee with documentation on these alternatives? Yes, there are thousands of examples. So would be suspending the ban on exporting of plastic, does that delay Canada in the fight against pollution? Sorry, if we suspend the ban on exporting plastic, as Canada has done, is that a delay in the fight against pollution? Oceans are global. There are no borders. It takes 8 days for contaminants to come from Asia through clouds into our coastal waters in Vancouver. 8 days. So that includes plastic fibers in the air. And for the ocean currents, it takes 1 year for pollutants to reach our shores in Vancouver from Asia. So if we're exporting the problem, we'll find them again in our coastal water. In the Arctic, it was estimated that most of polyester microparticles come from the Atlantic in the north and from North America. They are contaminating our Arctic waters.
Mr. Bexty for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues and witnesses, for being here today. I really appreciate your time and hope we can benefit from your wisdom. I have so many questions. Dr. Ross, could you please let the committee know what portion of marine plastics come from Canada globally, or what, conversely, what comes from the rest of the world?
That's a great question and an important question. We want to know our place in the world because we want our actions, our behaviors, and our regulations to deal with sources in Canada. Canada is a small player in the global economy. And if we look at macroplastics, i.e. think beverage bottles, single-use.
My time is limited, so if you could be succinct. Please.
So most of the macroplastic litter, it's agreed, is found in Southeast Asia, where there are virtually no recycling system and no safe water to drink. So you want to drink bottled water that you can be assured is safe. In Canada, we have been tightening up our rules on, we have blue bins that are very effective at preventing the loss into the environment.
Thank you. I just wanted to get at the number that hits the water, right, and where it comes from globally. Mr. Thurlow. What message do you think it sends to industry and people, right, when products can be manufactured in Canada? And I know you kind of addressed this question, or didn't address it earlier, can be exported from Canada but not sold to Canadians. And what I want to get at ultimately is the unintended consequences of some of our actions, right? We all agree that we don't want pollution, but I don't know that we're going about it the right way. You illustrate some important things about a circular economy that I'll get into later, but what about the hypocrisy of the actions that we've taken so far, that Canada is?
I'm not sure I would use the word hypocrisy. I think I would refer the committee to the Canada Gazette, where the very document that was tabled by Minister de Bruzen illustrated whether or not there was going to be a cost-benefit analysis to the decision to have the rule in place or not. And I think that language speaks for itself.
Okay, thank you. 8 days from Asia, 1 year by water from Asia, it kind of illustrates a lot that what we do here and impacting Canadians with unintended consequences is not necessarily the first order course of action that will give the biggest benefit. Canadians are being told daily, right, that they should pay more for groceries, that it should accept fewer choices. Food waste is going to become a problem. Affordability is a problem. Everything about, we say quite clearly, plastics are useful. This is why we have plastics. But prohibiting their use won't reduce global plastic pollution significantly from the Canadian perspective in the near term. What other behaviors should be recommended, right, to go to the circular economy that you were talking about, Mr. Thull?
So again, the very first thing I would recommend is some kind of a recycled content mandate for plastic. Environment Canada has begun that type of a consultation. They haven't designed an instrument for public dissemination yet. I would also just remind the committee that when you're walking down the street, there are certain types of plastics that you don't see. Okay, you mentioned the stubby. Well, you don't see plastic liquor bottles. Why? Deposit return. You don't see certain types of cans because of deposit return. So again, like, you have to look at what is working and emulate that model to as many of the other things that would be entering the natural environment as possible.
I think we have to be careful as well, right, about, and I'd like your views on this, about, subsequent unintended consequences because of the few options that are available. I mean, it's been mentioned quite often, a lot of the ocean-borne microplastics are from our clothes. We don't have enough natural fiber in the world to clothe the people that are in the world, right? So what options do we have?
So it's a fair point. We also have a growing world population which needs food. I think without the use of plastic packaging, I think you'd see a drastic increase in food waste. We already have very poor numbers on food waste. I think those numbers are going to go up incredibly without the advent of more use in plastic packaging. And this is particularly acute in rural and remote areas where they don't have the same access to the infrastructure that you see in the big cities.
I can't help but think the experience of going for a milkshake now, and I used to have one plastic straw, but now I have to use 4, right? And it just doesn't square the circle. And I think my time is up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bexty. We'll now turn to Mr. Fanjoy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, witnesses. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Rockman. First of all, I've heard from a number of people the great work that's happening at the University of Toronto on sustainability, and just I'm sure that you're part of that. I wanted to ask you, in your decades, I believe you mentioned, of studying plastic pollution, have you uncovered any evidence that the plastics industry is capable of solving this problem on their own?
I think that's a great question. I would say, have I uncovered evidence of plastic industry solving it? Well, we still have the problem, so I'm not sure that it's been solved yet. But I think one of the issues is that the supply chain is diverse. And so it's not just the people who make the pellets. They have to work with the people who mold it into a product. That product has to be made in such a way that it's practically recyclable, meaning if something is marketed to be colorful and beautiful, it doesn't recycle very well. Then you have to have that waste management infrastructure. Fully agree, we need to increase that. Then it needs to be recycled. Our most valuable plastic right now, or maybe not most valuable, but what we consider the most recoverable, is PET water bottles. Right now in Canada, we recycle 20% of PET. Why? Right now it's not working. So we do need a better full system, and single-use plastic bans seem to be at least reducing what we see in the environment, which is protecting wildlife. And what we've banned so far isn't packaging. It's other items.
We have a bit of a throwaway culture, and it's we're going to have to deal with that. There is no away with plastic. It all goes somewhere. I have a community in my riding of Carleton that possibly could be the site of a future landfill, and they're very concerned about that. So whether that's that garbage goes to our ridings or someplace in Canada, or it migrates around the world, someone is paying a price for that, and also someone is profiting from that. So how do we how do we balance the desire to have the benefits of that plastics have delivered? And I don't argue that there are some benefits, but how do we mitigate the toxic mass that they're creating to our environment?
I mean, I think there's a lot of great uses of plastic material, from putting it in cars and airplanes to medical equipment. But just about 50%, 40% of all the plastics that we create are single-use plastics. Some, you may argue, are necessary and some are less necessary. And so the policy that was put in place here is, if it is less necessary, it's replaceable, it's often found in the environment, that's the one you can reduce. Human behavior change is really hard, but it's a big part of the equation. But when we interview people on the streets and say, restaurants and people thinking about reusable foodware, what is your willingness to change? People are willing to change. They want those solutions in place. So yes, we can reduce and protect the environment, but still use the plastics that I think are really important. I think we need both.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Ross, in your research, what is the status of substitutes for single-use plastics that can meet our needs but be less harmful or even beneficial to the environment?
That's a great question. My research has been really focused on pollution, which is, what do I find in our waterways? What do I find in our wildlife? What do we find in our indigenous foods? And those include many harmful chemicals that Canada has since banned. Look at the leadership role that Canada played in developing the Stockholm Convention to eliminate persistent organic pollutants. That was science-based, it was concerned about the Inuit, and it took action, and now the world has rallied around that treaty, and it's very effective in improving the health and safety of our indigenous foods and our wildlife. In terms of innovation, I mean, in Vancouver, there are lots of products. You can go into a coffee shop and use their cup. You can use a paper cup. Sometimes they're lined with plastic. We've got to be careful. There are bamboo plates. There are coconut products. There are all sorts of things going on. And I put it to you that there's lots of innovation, and there is a Canadian economy around alternative materials. And I would encourage the committee not just to think about the plastics as a material, but also the alternatives to those plastics. There's money in it.
Enjoy. Maintenant, Monsieur Bonin pour 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Bonin, you have 2 minutes. I'll give my last minute to my Green Party candidate here, my colleague, rather. You talking about greenhouse gases. Could you tell us about over the whole cycle of life, the GHG emissions, Mr. Thurlow? I wanted to be more specific.
Je vous enverrai ça, mais c'est très gentil. Madame Rockman.
And Ms. Rockman, I saw that you have many recommendations on how we could go further to counter plastic pollution through regulation. Could you send this to the committee, because you don't have time? You had a series of recommendations, and Mr. Ross as well, you had some to really improve the Canadian strategy, what you see that we could do. And so, and do you find that it's contradictory that the government talks about protecting nature and is going back in terms of the fight against plastic pollution? Do you find that that's consistent?
I'm really sorry.
Oh.
Yeah. Did you say that the government really wants to protect nature and you're worried that we're going backwards on it? Was that the question?
Pollution.
On plastic pollution. Yes, I mean, I think Canada was a really large leader in this space when we started taking it seriously around 2019. I mean, you could say 2017 with the microbead ban. And we were moving forward on so many things, including recycled content standards. And we are at risk of going backwards. And I don't think right now we have a reason to do it. We haven't solved the problem. I mean, the amount of plastic I see in Lake Ontario just walking the shoreline is astounding. Yeah.
I will let my colleague.
Madam Chair, a minute. Dr. Ross, I'm wondering, obviously, we've got involved, a lot of us, in trying to get rid of single-use plastics because we saw it choking the life out of wildlife. But I'm really quite concerned about microplastics entering the human body, the health effects of that. And you mentioned landfills. So if you could touch briefly on microplastics and human health and what you're finding in landfills, for instance, any sign of the forever chemicals, the PFAS.
Great series of questions. We are concerned about microplastics in human health, particularly nanoplastics that can freely pass the GI tract barrier and even the blood-brain barrier. So we are concerned about very, very small particles of plastic. And remember my comment, or if I can recall my comment about all plastics today will not break down chemically in the future. They will break down into smaller and smaller pieces such that all plastics are a reservoir for potential human health risks. So think about a plastic bottle today. In 1,000 years, it might be 1 million pieces of plastic. So we're very worried about that. Sorry, I think my time is up, but you had a second question?
PFAS, if it was in
PFAS. We are detecting per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are forever chemicals. There are 15,000 of them. We only have the analytical methods to measure 44 of them. Very complex family. They're found, it's the old Teflon Scotchgard family of chemicals. The shorter change versions are found in airport aqueous firefighting foams and other products, some stain repellents, water repellents. They're forever chemicals. Like plastics, they are found in landfills. They're leaching out of landfills. They're contaminating groundwater supplies. I find them in drinking water supplies in British Columbia.
We will now turn to Mr. Ross for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this on? Okay, good. Yeah, thank you for your testimony to all the witnesses. And I am Indigenous. I come from Kitimat Village, BC. And I appreciate the comments saying that you'll look for Indigenous knowledge. But to be clear, Indigenous people use plastics just as much as non-Indigenous. It's an affordability issue. It's a safety issue when we're talking about food packaging. So we've been struggling for answers to the same questions that you're posing today in terms of the marine environment, for example, for rivers and oceans. And I do eat seafood 4 times a week still. But in saying that, in talking about affordability and the safety of food packaging that plastic provides, and this is for Mr. Roachman, should the federal government ban single-use plastics used in food packaging and in grocery stores?
I don't have a good answer to that. I don't necessarily think we know enough to do that. I think for certain packaging, I think the answer is it depends. For certain food items where a box is just as good at keeping the product viable for a long time.
How about meat?
Meat, I think it would be very hard to get away from plastic and meat unless we're going to a butcher regularly and we're getting it wrapped in the paper and we're having it handed to us.
Okay. Has the government, the federal government, indicated any openness to a ban of single-use plastics in grocery stores?
I haven't seen any. So we actually had a project in grocery stores for a bit. We were more focused on the produce bags that you can choose to take or not to choose, or not to take. No, there is a pollution prevention plan for grocery stores. I think it's been unpopular, but there has been a pollution prevention plan for grocery stores to try to get them to reduce their plastics where they can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Mr. Ross, I was intrigued by your comments about the content and how it's ending up in our environment. And to my understanding, what you said is we're all polluters, including every one of us that wears suits. Each one of us have synthetic fibers that's making it into our environment every time we wash our clothes. I've never heard that before. But Canada's trying, at least. They're trying. And I'll give you the example of synthetic fibers and tires. So BC is trying to regulate this, and they're doing a pretty good job. But 15% of every tire makes it into our environment. But it's regulated so we know exactly what's in a tire, so we know exactly what's getting into the environment. Unfortunately, that does not speak to other countries that use loopholes to get commercial tires into our market in BC. And so we don't know what's in those tires coming from China, for example. And so as an option, what BC is considering is saying, hiring the fees for British Columbians who obey the rules to cover the costs of these single-use tires coming in from China. Is there anything that Canada can do to help persuade the provinces and other countries not to import or export from their countries into our countries their products that don't abide by our environmental regulations.
Absolutely. I believe very strongly in the power of trade agreements, and I believe in the power of CEPA and other pieces of relevant legislation and other treaties globally that prevent pollutants or harmful substances getting into the Canadian economy. For example, we are not allowed to import PCBs into Canada or manufacture them or dispose of them.
So how do the government square this when then Canadians want to do good by the environment? They are recycling their tires. They are bringing it to approved facilities. But yet there's a huge amount of tires coming from China, single use, that can't be recycled. And we don't know what's in those tires. And so basically, somehow it's not even being recycled. It's ending up in our landfills. And Canadians have to foot the bill for this. I think this is important right now because the federal government is now talking about a new trade agreement with China, and yet they haven't resolved the environmental impact of these single-use tires ending up in our Canadian environment.
I think that's a great example. In fact, a lot of tires are not only ending up in landfills, they're ending up being recycled to put onto our children's playing fields, where they have harmful chemicals, a lot of them proprietary. I would go back to my point about labeling. There are something like 600 chemicals in tires for which there's no
in terms of China,
information.
in terms of a single-use product coming from China that's a tire that can't be recycled, we don't know what the content, and everybody's turning a blind eye to it. How do we address that as Canadians, and how do we get the federal government and the provincial governments to actually take it seriously?
We require labeling on that imported product, so the proprietary components of that tire are made known to the authorities in Environment Canada.
And
number two,
and those products...
Sorry.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Mr. Grant for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'll start with you, Mr. Thurlow, and it's been clear that the plastics manufacturers are not in agreement with the government trying to ban their products. This is quite clear. Is there any aspect of government's approach to plastic and plastic waste that you can support?
So absolutely. The consultations about the recycled content mandate that Environment Canada has initiated is a very broad, stakeholder-rich discussion. There are a lot of very serious questions about, we're going to talk about the phytosanitary issues associated with certain aspects of the recycled contents. Like you mentioned low-value products like benches. Those are high-value products to parents who sit in parks and watch their kids play. Like, if we are going to recycle things and we're going to collect those things, we need to deploy them back into the economy in a way that they're useful. And some food packaging, some medical devices, they have very specific requirements, and there are challenges associated with meeting those phytosanitary requirements. So in the meantime, let's make more benches. I have a chair in my backyard from the plastic waste from London, and it's a very comfortable chair. So don't be so quick to dismiss some of those other uses. Recycled content mandates will work. They will create the economies of scale that will be required to make the improvements needed to our recycling system. Like, I think all three of us agree that we are not doing a great job at this in Canada. Well, the more we can invest into that system to improve it, the better.
Great. And to you as well, the part of the Act that was used to designate plastics as toxic is the basis for Canada's Chemicals Management Plan. Are you able to explain to the committee the process by which a chemical substance is assessed and managed and the steps that the CMP undertakes to ensure that there is targeted risk management?
Absolutely. And I think with the exception of this particular regulation, Canada has the global gold standard when it comes to chemicals management. And that is because we have a multi-phased approach where we look at the volumes of the chemistries in question. We do a risk assessment on each individual chemistry and those uses. We identify uses where there might be some types of exposures of concern. Then we have very targeted rules on how we're going to do the risk management for those chemistries. It just feels like on this particular one, they're doing something different. But Canada is the world leader on chemicals management. We talked earlier about the advent of the Stockholm Convention. Like this rule, which was originally designed by Prime Minister Chrétien's government and implemented by Prime Minister Harper's government, is the beacon around the world for the efficient use of resources and ensuring that chemistries are being used in products in a way that are safe for Canadians?
Thank you. Dr. Ross, like my colleague, Mr. Ross, I'm an Indigenous person from the coast of BC. I'm actually in the south coast at the mouth of the Fraser River from the Musqueam First Nation. I've spent many, many years on the water fishing with my family. My brother's still a commercial fisher, and I've been on the water and noticed the increase in plastics as they flow down the river, out in the Salish Sea. And I know that some of them have come from many, many, many miles away because of the branding on these plastics and whatnot. Are you able to help the community understand what body of evidence actually shows how single-use plastics move through a marine ecosystem once they enter it?
Well, that's great. That's a very large question, but thank you for your observation and for your concern. There are many different types of studies out there, and I would say Canada is a global leader in terms of studying plastics and microplastics. Dr. Rockman's lab is at the forefront of many interesting and relevant studies that help us to understand plastics in the environment. Many different approaches to figuring out what we find where, and the more we look, the more we realize plastics are everywhere. Microplastics are everywhere. Everything from satellite surveillance and surveillance aircraft in the North Pacific to icebreakers in the Canadian Arctic to smaller studies on ship or shore in coastal waters. Scientists have been busy trying to figure out how to get their heads around this complex pollutant problem. Mr. Thurlow mentioned that it's different than the chemical problem. It is because of the snowflake issue. Every piece of plastic is different. And I would go back to, if we are going to deal with recycling, we need to increase the value of the recycled product. We need it to be food safe. We need it to be labeled. We don't want harmful chemicals in it, like flame retardant chemicals or hardening agents that are estrogenic. We don't want those things in it. As soon as we increase the value of the recycled product or the product that will be recycled, people will pick them up, people will clean them up, and we'll have a aftermarket for that product.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our witnesses this morning. We really appreciate it. We will adjourn to switch over to our next panel. Thank you. get started with our second hour of our day-long study of single-use plastics prohibition regulations. Welcome, witnesses. Thank you so much for coming today. We have Greg Moffat, the President and CEO of Chemistry Industry Association of Canada. We have Karen Versig, the Senior Program Manager for Plastics from Environmental Defence Canada, and Anthony Morant, Senior Plastics Campaigner from Oceana Canada. If I'm saying that incorrectly, please correct me in your opening statement. You each have 5 minutes to give opening remarks. And then we will go to questions by committee members. So I will begin with Mr. Moffat. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. CIC represents Canada's chemistry and plastics manufacturers, companies that produce materials essential to healthcare, food preservation, transportation, clean technology, energy efficiency, and advanced manufacturing. Chemistry and plastics combined represent $108 billion in shipments in Canada, close to 175,000 jobs, approximately $14 billion in wages, and $65 billion in trade, with the U.S. as our largest trading market. Let me begin with a simple statement. CIC and our members support the goal of eliminating plastic waste. What we have consistently opposed is the federal government's approach to achieving that goal. For years, CIC has argued that Canada's challenge is not plastics themselves, it is plastic waste. Yet much of the federal approach has focused on reducing plastics through bans and restrictions, rather than addressing the systems needed to keep plastics in the economy and out of the environment. Our concern was never the objective, it was the choice of policy tools. From the outset, we warned that a reduction-focused approach would create economic harm, discourage investment, increase costs for manufacturers, and divert attention away from the infrastructure, innovation, and recovery systems required to achieve meaningful environmental outcomes. Today, many of those concerns have proven true. For CIC members, the single-use plastics prohibition regulation have resulted in the loss of product lines, significant transition costs, and ongoing competitive disadvantages relative to producers in other jurisdictions. In some cases, the regulations have contributed to the permanent shutdown of manufacturing lines, resulting in a loss of well-paying jobs and broader impacts on local communities. Yet despite these costs and impacts, Canada still faces many of the same collection, recovery, recycling, and end-of-life management challenges that existed when this began. Most importantly, the federal government itself has now acknowledged the limitations of this approach. In proposing to withdraw the manufacture for export ban on certain plastic products, the government's regulatory impact analysis statement acknowledged what CIC had argued from the outset. The measure would impose economic costs without delivering meaningful environmental benefits, as production and demand would simply shift to other jurisdictions rather than reduce global plastic pollution. That conclusion should guide future policy. Measures that create economic harm without producing measurable environmental improvements are not good environmental policy. The objective must be environmental outcomes, not symbolic measures. The question before Canada today is not whether action is required. The question is whether we are prepared to adopt a framework that delivers results. CIC believes the answer is yes, but it requires a new national framework for plastics built on collaboration, accountability, and measurable outcomes. The federal government's role should be to establish national outcomes, remove barriers to investment, support infrastructure deployment, and work with provinces to harmonize policy and reporting requirements. First, governments must align around shared objectives. The federal government should establish national outcomes focused on waste reduction, recovery, recycling, recycled content, and circularity, while provinces continue leading collection, recycling, and waste management systems within their jurisdictions. Second, Canada needs a national circular plastics infrastructure strategy. If we want better outcomes, we need the infrastructure to achieve them. That means supporting investment in collection systems, sorting facilities, recycling technologies, and domestic markets for recycled materials. Third, policy success must be measured by outcomes. not by the number of regulations enacted or products restricted, but by recovery rates, recycled content, reductions in environmental leakage, infrastructure deployed, and investment attracted. Finally, Canada needs a regulatory framework that supports both environmental performance and economic competitiveness. That means streamlined approvals, coordinated policy frameworks, and policies that encourage innovation and investment that rather than creating barriers to them. Canada's success depends on achieving both. The countries that will lead the future circular economy will not be those that simply regulate the most. They will be the countries that build infrastructure, attract investment, deploy technology, and create the conditions necessary to keep valuable materials in productive use. Canada has every opportunity to be one of those countries. Plastics waste is the problem, circularity is the solution, and success should be measured not by intentions, but by outcomes. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moffat. We will now turn to Ms. Versig for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for inviting me to testify. I'm Senior Program Manager for Plastics at Environmental Defence Canada. My name is Karen Versig, and I've spent the last 6 years advocating full-time for policies to eliminate plastic pollution in Canada. I'd like to underscore that plastic harms at every stage of its existence, from the water and air pollution related to extraction, refining, cracking, and polymerization of fossil fuels and the manufacturing of plastics, to the microplastics and chemical additives shed from products in use, to the waste from plastic that is discarded, often after a short life. The harms to animals and their habitats of this plastic in the wild is well documented. Some of the people most affected by plastic pollution live close to production and disposal sites and facilities, most often Indigenous communities, low-income people, and recent immigrants. But it is the Inuit in the far north who face the highest concentrations of microplastics and toxic plastic-related chemicals in ocean water and food sources, despite the fact that no plastic is made there and very little is used. Everyone I encounter, no matter where they live, is concerned about all the plastic in their everyday lives and how impossible it is to avoid it. Public engagement and polling on this issue confirms that plastic pollution is a concern for the vast majority of the population, no matter what province they live in, how old they are, or what party they voted for in the last election. And it turns out that the ban on single-use plastic items implemented in 2022 was a watershed moment, launching a national conversation about the overconsumption of plastic for often trivial and unnecessary things. After the ban, flimsy film checkout bags given out like candy to the tune of about $15 billion in the single year of 2019 disappeared almost overnight. Like magic, stir sticks turned back into wood, and even reusable metal spoons. Those 4 straws tossed into the bottom of a takeout order or onto the floor of the local bar without being used, mostly gone. The proof of the effectiveness of the bans is found in rivers and on shorelines across Canada. People who conduct litter and coastline cleanups attest that bans work. Oceanwise reported on several years of annual cleanup data, revealing that the number of single-use plastic bags, utensils, and straws participants found dropped dramatically after 2022, even as non-banned plastics, especially single-use cups and lids, have nearly doubled since 2017. Surfrider Canada launched cleanups in highly visited stretches along the west coast of Vancouver Island starting in 2016, at the time finding significant amounts of single-use plastics. The group helped usher in the first municipal bans on single-use plastic straws and polystyrene in Tofino and Ucluelet, and one of the first local bans on single-use plastic checkout bags. These municipal and federal bans have reduced the prevalence of single-use plastic waste on the West Coast beaches, but Surfrider has continued to advocate for expanded bans, celebrating a local ban on small-format water bottles in Tofino this year, and aiming for a ban on single-use coffee cups and lids in the near future. And then there are the Great Lakes, where concentrations of microplastics are higher than in the ocean garbage patches. A significant source is the fragmentation and breakdown of larger plastic items during use or after disposal, including directly into the environment. And another source, of course, is pre-production pellets found on beaches throughout the Great Lakes. Microplastics researchers at the University of Waterloo have concluded that it is impossible to clean up the growing microplastic mess after it is set loose in the environment. We need to reduce the amount of plastic that is produced and consumed. Don't Mess with the Don, a local cleanup group devoted to Canada's most urban river, the Don, is also advocating for additional measures to curb single-use plastics. On a recent cleanup, the organizers told us that they've all but stopped seeing plastic bags since the 2022 federal ban. Like Surfrider, they've turned their attention to single-use plastic beverage containers and coffee cups and lids. And this is not a uniquely Canadian problem. Our U.S. neighbors have actually been conducting Great Lakes coastal cleanup since 2003, where they've reported significant amounts of tobacco and food-related single-use plastics. This group in the U.S. is calling for policies to reduce or eliminate most problematic plastics, like single-use bags and foam, on their side of the border. The Federal Court of Appeal has endorsed the federal government's approach to ending plastic pollution, so let's get to work. What we support is expanding the federal bans of harmful single-use plastics, including tobacco-related products, takeout cups and lids, and nuisance packaging, reinstating the prohibition on exports of the banned single-use plastics, stepped up education and enforcement on the existing bans to ensure that companies are complying. And in addition, we're calling for measures to transition away from harmful and unnecessary single-use plastics in the economy. We do care about the economy. We want a healthy and safe economy, and we therefore support the development of accessible and affordable reuse and refill systems to replace single-use packaging. These systems are job creators. And 2, end public subsidies to plastics, petrochemical, and oil and gas production, which depresses the price for plastics and allows them to compete unfairly with more sustainable alternatives. Thank you.
And now we will turn to Mr. Moret for 5 minutes.
Et bonjour, Madame la Présidente et membres du comité. Merci pour l'invitation. Je m'appelle Anthony Morante, Senior Plastics Campaigner chez OCEAN.
Hello. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Anthony Morante. I'm Senior Plastics Campaigner.
Solely to oceans conservation. I'm here today to urge you and this committee to recommend the federal government delay rather than repeal the prohibition on manufacture, import, and sale of targeted single-use plastics for the purpose of export. Specifically, Oceanic Canada recommends extending the coming into force date from 2025 to 2029. La pollution plastique est une crise mondiale.
Plastic pollution is a global crisis, and it does not respect national borders.
Environment, particularly the ocean, it moves. Plastic spreads across currents, coastlines, far removed from the country of origin. And once in the ocean, plastic pollution wreaks havoc on marine wildlife. Single-use plastics have been found in the stomachs of whales, around the necks of seabirds, and contaminating wild-caught fish. This means our domestic regulatory choices have direct consequences to other nations' environments, marine ecosystems, and their communities. It is not sufficient to end plastic pollution within Canada. We must eliminate our contribution to the global supply chain of harmful single-use plastics. I challenge this notion that's been addressed today that bans don't work. As noted by my peers, bans have decreased single-use plastics in the environment. But what does limit the ban's effectiveness are the illegal challenges brought forward by petrochemical companies, not only in Canada, but in the United States. The question before the committee is whether Canada will build on that progress or walk it back. There are 4 reasons why Oceanic Canada believes a delay rather than a repeal is the right path. First, Canada has made binding legal international commitments to greater plastic stewardship, affirmed by the Federal Court of Appeal, amendments to SEPA in both the precautionary period and precautionary principle and an ecosystem-based approach as duties by the federal government. Canada has signed onto the Oceans Plastics Charter in 2018 and has played a leadership role in the INC negotiations towards a global plastic treaty. While Canada has made these commitments in good faith and good negotiations towards reducing plastic pollution, both domestically and internationally, policy gaps exist. In December of 2025 alone, Canada exported approximately 12.7 million kilograms of plastic waste, 83% of that going to the U.S. with an unknown fate. Repealing this export prohibition would further add to Canada's contribution to the global plastic pollution crisis and directly contradict those commitments, thus undermining our credibility at the international negotiating table. Secondly, the primary rationale offered for this repeal, pressure from the U.S. administration regarding paper straws, is not a legal trade barrier. President Trump's February 2025 executive order applies only to federal procurement. It does not ban straws nationally, nor does it restrict the private sales of paper straws, and it has yet to be finalized into regulation. Meanwhile, U.S. states representing more than 110 million consumers and over $11 trillion USD in economic activity, inclusive of California, New York, and dozens of other states, have enacted their own single-use plastic regulations. Canada's competitive advantage lies in aligning with those markets, not retreating from them. Third, repealing this export creates a disadvantage to the many Canadian businesses that have already made the transition in good faith. These businesses have invested in alternative products, materials, and equipment. Businesses cannot make sound investments and divestments under a federal government that is walking back policies. On single-use plastics, it was made clear in 2021 that those products bound for landfill in the environment are not welcome in our supply chain. Thus, provinces and EPR schemes followed suit and used them as guides to move in the same direction, while municipalities followed suit. A reversal throws us off course and will devalue the millions invested by businesses and subnational governments alike. Fourth, Canadians support the regulation of plastic products. In December of 2025, 85% of Canadians said they support the federal regulation to reduce unnecessary single-use plastics, and 83% believe it is the federal government that bears the greatest responsibility to do so. In closing, the prohibition of single-use plastic exports is the mechanism by which Canada ensures its domestic environmental ambitions do not simply become another country's problem. A delay to 2029 preserves the policy coherence, honors Canada's international obligations, supports businesses navigating the supply chain, and recognizes the ongoing pressures from the U.S.
Much, Mr. Morente. We will now go to questions by committee members, and we'll begin with Mr. Ross for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Moffat, you talked a little bit about the economy, and this committee has heard different testimony in terms of a circular economy. And really, I've got to expand on that, being a global economy, because we know the federal government has actually lifted part of its plastics ban so that Canadian business wouldn't get impacted. So they're allowed to export plastics to the United States just to keep the economy going and business going. But in Prince Rupert, plastic pellets are exported to Asia, where they will make products with low environmental standards, low labor standards, and Canadians will buy back the finished product. So this shows you how complicated this problem is. And we're talking about further regulating this for recycled content or content to begin with. Is it better for us to export plastic pellets to other countries that don't have the same standards as us? Or is it better Canadians with our high standards do it ourselves?
First and foremost, I guess I would say, regardless of whether we're talking about plastic pellets or fibers or proteins or things that are a product of resource extraction, you're much better off to add value to those products here than to move them in their, raw form and have that activity take place somewhere else. What I would say to you is that, we've heard from some of our members that, yes, they've gone through the transition and they may have made investments in new technologies, but they're competing against imports from other jurisdictions that don't have the same energy, labor, regulatory, tax costs that they have here. So it's a valid question for sure.
Okay, thank you. And we're talking about this global economy. Really, on this side, we want results, especially in terms of the plastics that are making it into our environment. As an Indigenous person, I've been battling this for 20 years in my local community there. But in terms of the Stockholm Convention, that there's many countries signed up to, including Canada, it seems that a lot of countries are not holding up their end of the bargain. In Southeast Asia, for example, the cumulative impact is 550 million tons of plastics making it into our environment, a marine environment to boot, as opposed to Canada, where it's averaged about 8 million tons as our contribution to marine pollution. But Canada is trying to do better. But it seems Canada, along with some other countries, are alone in that respect, and we're actually allowing plastic products to be made elsewhere for Canadian use, and we're not really enforcing the Stockholm Convention on anybody. Is this fair to Canadians? Is it fair to Canadian businesses? Or is there something that Canada can be doing internationally to put more pressure on these other signatories to this convention to do better?
Well, the plastic waste issue in developing countries isn't because they don't have a recycling system, it's because they don't have waste collection like we have here in North America, right? So this is a collection and a recovery issue globally. I would say that when we're thinking about regulating here in Canada, we should be thinking about what are the impacts, not just from a science-based or data-driven life cycle analysis approach. What is the impact of the alternatives compared to the products or chemistries that are proposed to be regulated? I think there is a middle ground there that you're thinking about an environmental impacts, but you're also thinking about the economic and competitiveness impacts. There's a sweet spot there. There's a nexus. And I would say that's where we should be focusing our attention.
Thank you for that. And there's a lot of scrutiny being placed on imported products coming into Canada now, not just in terms of plastics, but in terms of origin, especially for the United States, not wanting Canada to be a doorway into their market with products coming from different places that use substandard labor policies. Let's put it that way. But in terms of products coming from different countries, like say electric vehicles or not, should it get down to the point where we're actually documenting, regulating the amount of plastics and what kind of plastics and what amounts in, say, electric vehicles coming into Canada?
Interesting question. What I would say is, regardless of whether it's an electric vehicle or a gas, internal combustion, plastics and chemistries now make up close to 40% of the value of materials in a car, right? Certainly not the weight, but it's what allows them to be lightweight. It's what allows the battery within the vehicle to operate, right? I think it's important that certainly from a Canadian perspective, we have the chemicals management plan. We're assessing chemistries. We should be thinking about where we're bringing goods from, and are those products going through the same assessment that happens in a very robust way here in Canada.
So the reason I ask is because single-use tires are coming in from China, and we have no idea what the content is. We know there's plastics in those tires, 24% at least, and 15% of those commercial tires are making it into our environment. And there's regulations around that in BC at the least, but everybody's turning a blind eye to it. Nobody's really addressing this. And in fact, the extra cost to regulate this and manage this is actually going to fall to Canadians who are actually obeying the law. So if we don't get a handle on exports and imports, this problem is not going to get addressed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross. We will now go to Mr. Millett for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today as well. Mr. Moffat, in my riding in the Bay of Quinte, in Ontario, I note that the Quinte Region Recycling was actually the first in Ontario to introduce blue box recycling, and it's kind of a point of pride for us. And we've since watched the recycling industry remake itself. Certain products are profitable for resale and reuse. So my question to you then is, the chemical and plastics industry, often emphasize recycling and circular economy solutions. So what evidence can you provide, Mr. Moffat, that current recycling systems can meaningfully address public plastic waste at the scale required?
Sure. I would just say, in the previous panel, the 9% Canada, there was a 9% in Canada number in terms of rate of recycling. It's over 50% in British Columbia, and there's a reason for that. They've had extended producer responsibility for 12 years now. The system works. Those that bring plastics into the province are financially incented to bring products into the market that are recyclable, and they are incented to find markets for the recycled content. And the rest of Canada needs to move down that journey. And it's one of the reasons why in my comments I said, this is about collaboration. This is a systems problem. It's a complex issue. It's governments, it's industry, it's the consumers and industry that use products and dispose of them after they've been used, their useful life. This is a systems problem, and extended producer responsibility is an excellent example, and BC is a shining example of how it could work.
Further to that point, we've found, as Ontario has moved to the circular economy, as it's been billed, basically in terms of recycling at the residential level and the commercial level at a paid rate, we're finding that when it's the producer pay model, if you will, that some areas are experiencing revisions where and this was the greatest fear that we heard for years, that when it came time for the piper to pay, if you will, they can remake the model of what they will collect and what they won't collect. That's a concern in some areas, and can you just address that?
I'm from Alberta and Calgary, and I've got a green box, a blue box, and a black box. And that is very, very confusing for some, and sometimes I find it confusing myself, right? Can I put a used pizza box into recycling, or does it have to go to composting? And by the way, it has to go to composting because it's got cheese and oil on it. But I would say what we have now is better than what we had before. I believe there's 500 or 600 municipalities, both urban and rural in Ontario. It's about 470 in Alberta. They were all different. They weren't talking to each other. The incentives were completely different. Municipalities were dealing with their waste at the lowest cost because that's what they were concerned about. And now with extended producer responsibility, the system's talking to itself. The right incentives are there for those that are bringing plastics into the marketplace, and it should get better. And, it's just like everything else. These EPR systems have to take a look at what they are achieving on a yearly, every 2, 3, 5-year basis. And that's continuous improvement, and we should focus on it. But it's way better now than it was.
All right, thank you. And a question for Ms. Wersig. As a member of myself being a member of the Parliamentary Great Lakes group and Council for working closely with the Council of the Great Lakes, I see the successes that we have, and as you said, of some of the efforts to clean up plastic in waterways on beaches and that sort of thing. So Environmental Defense has then advocated for reductions in plastic production. What federal policies then, Ms. Wersig, would have the greatest impact on reducing plastic pollution at the source?
Yeah, we've been on the record supporting a move globally to reduce plastic production worldwide because we think that is going to be the best way to reduce consumption and waste of plastics. In Canada, we'd like to see the path continued, that the path that was started under SEPA should be continued. And added to that, added to prohibition regulations and requirements and targets for reducing plastics, we should add a basket of measures to move the people and companies away from the single-use plastics. And we think that adding the carrot with the stick will be most helpful in reducing plastics because people really want to do it. And I think people are telling the businesses that they shop at and that they get goods from that they want to do it. And so that's where I think the federal government can step up its game. The other place is obviously to be a strong voice at the Global Plastics Treaty table.
Yeah, to your point, I think that's really been exemplified when we saw the reduction of the elimination, if you will, of plastic single-use bags at checkout. It's second nature now for most people to bring their own bags, and they happily use their favorites. Thank you.
Maintenant, je tourne à Monsieur Bonin pour 6.
And now, Mr. Bonin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Moffat, I have to say that I was very happy of the Supreme Court decision. There are people from your industry with Dow Chemical and Imperial tried to interfere with regulation that protects health, and the results are important. I'm sorry for you. Do you know if the ban on exports, do you know how many losses in jobs if that were in place? I'm saying direct jobs. Would that represent?
Speak
Je ne peux pas vous parler au nom de toute l'industrie.
part. So the ban of Genpack, which has operations in British Columbia.
Combien d'emplois, monsieur?
How many jobs?
About 150 jobs, two companies, and about $75 million in lost value. Two companies out of the 1,900 roughly in the supply chain. Don't know how it impacts.
Madame Rursig, je sais pas.
Ms. Wirsig, I don't know if you have any figures, or Mr. Mirante. Are there jobs that would not exist if we don't go to alternatives to plastics? So we're talking about a few jobs that will be lost. It's not negligible. But are there positive sides if we for other businesses? I have two examples at this point. It's the launch of the World Cup, and there are two cities in Canada where there will be reuse of packing in the fan zones, in Toronto and in Vancouver, where they will be using only containers and dishes that can be used many times. And these two companies that are offering those services are hiring people because those services create local jobs, and it's very important. It's, as we say, we can exchange waste for jobs. And does the ban, the steps taken back by the government, does that not encourage the plastics industry and the Alberta oil and gas sector at the expense of these alternatives? According to us, it's a problem because those industries are not making the transition towards healthier materials and services, and that would represent more jobs in Canada. So that's why we are absolutely in favor, not only for environmental reasons, but also for economic reasons, a transition towards solutions that are in the sector of packaging and containers. And Canada talks a lot about protecting nature, and now we see that they're going back on the fight against plastic pollution. Is that hypocritical of the government to go back and say that nature is important? I admit that I don't like the decision, and I think that in the meantime the Court of Appeal has confirmed that the government is on the right path. So we should, as Mr. Mirante proposed, we have to absolutely come back to this ban on the exporting of those products. Thank you. So is that hypocritical to talk about protecting nature and to do that? Well, hypocritical, it's unfortunate. And Mr. Mirante, what has Canada done over the past 3 years to fight against plastic pollution?
The legal proceedings, they have put forward the National Plastics Registry, which increases transparency over the whole life cycle of plastics. Well, during the legal case, there has been no further regulation. We have seen things mentioned before, the pollution prevention plan for major grocers, which is the main source of plastic pollution, a recycled content regulation put forward, but there's been no regulatory action on single-use plastics since the ban was initially put forward and the legal proceedings brought forward by the petrochemical companies have started.
Rien de significatif au niveau réglementaire depuis 3 ans.
Nothing significant in the regulatory area for the past 3 years. Do you think that's also a serious step backwards in environmental regulation?
Their hands are legally tied from there, but we have seen small departments like ECCC invest heavily in reuse, trying to support reuse companies, viable alternatives to reduce plastic pollution and grow jobs in the local circular economy. But we have also seen investments, I would say not smart investment in chemical and advanced recycling, where that money could be going towards upstream solutions that stop plastic pollution at its source.
OK. Et est-ce que vous avez, je sais, Madame.
And I know, Ms. Bursick, that you were following the international negotiations for the Treaty on Plastics. Do you share this high ambition treaty that is not consistent, but we have to attack the production of plastics? We have to start with single-use plastics that are more dangerous for health. Yes, I'm completely in agreement. For you, it's not just recycling. You also have to reduce. Recycling will never solve the problem. We'll never be able to recycle all the straws and the single-use bags. It's impossible. So that is not the solution, clearly. Thank you very much, Mr. Bonnet.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses and colleagues, for joining here today. Appreciate it. Mr. Moffat, Deloitte had a study that found Environment Canada, their proposed plastic regulations could increase food costs by 34%. Are you concerned that policymakers are not really taking into account the unintended consequences of implementation of this policy, like the second and third order effects?
Yeah, I will just say, when we're thinking about policy mechanisms to address problems, we should be taking a science-based, data-driven approach, right? And, one of the reasons why plastics are so ubiquitous in the food distribution system is because they're lighter. And you can put more in a package, right? You can put more in a truck when you're moving these vegetables from farm to table, right? And so there's a reason why plastics are there, for sure.
Because they're useful for society.
Because they're useful and they generate benefits, absolutely.
Could restrictions on plastic packaging result in more food waste then? Would it be fair to say that's sort of a
That's absolutely
pretty
fair to
reasonable
say.
assumption? Okay, thank you. Are you aware of any studies that have been conducted really looking at the vectors? Like, we've established that plastics are useful to society, they're valuable molecules. We've had some discussion that recycling processes may not be effective. Are you aware of any studies that have looked at what the actual vectors are of plastics reaching the environment, the unintended path to the environment?
Not aware of specific research per se. I would say that some of our members, along with companies within the sector internationally, are very active in supporting research, especially around the issue of microplastics.
Yeah, we can move on. I mean, I would assert that the problem is not that the plastics exist; it's how people choose to use them or how they behave badly. In high-trust countries like Singapore, right, everybody follows the rules. They don't toss the straw out. They put it in the receptacle. To move on to another point, in your remarks you stated that the government's withdrawal from the export ban effectively acknowledges that these measures would impose economic costs and without delivering meaningful environmental results. Could you expand on that?
Again, I think this is just a question of, especially in the export context, Canadian companies are going to be unable to produce for export, and that export is going to come from somewhere else, right? Again, there's a valid argument, and we've heard it anecdotally from our members, that imports from other jurisdictions, they have lower energy costs, lower environmental costs, labor standards, and so what are we trading off, right? And again, I would just say, fundamentally, we're not opposed to the addressing plastic waste issue, and it becomes pollution because we allow it to. And so the focus needs to be on the systems that allow us to collect and recover this material after it's being used, right? To think that a ban is the most appropriate way to address this issue, you're not recognizing and acknowledging the systems that are necessary to achieve the goal.
Thank you, Mr. Moffat. I think this is another example of how the government has sort of missed the mark again and again and again on taking a course of action without expecting a certain set of results and other things happen, right? And not anticipating or taking into account the consequences like food waste and the increased cost of food and cost of living for Canadians in the use case without addressing the root cause of the problem. It's not that the plastics exist, it's where they end up. And so we have to do the right work about ensuring that we protect our environments, and get the societal benefits of having plastics in place. So despite the bans, you noted that Canada faces many of the same collection recovery challenges. Has there any federal movement from this government on addressing that issue, on the recovery and recycling?
I would say that, back in 2021, I think it was December 2021, the Minister of Environment mandate letter said work with Innovation, Science and Economic Development to implement a $100 million circular economy technology fund. The signals were there, but that's yet to be put in place, right?
So there's been no movement or no action on that, on the part of the government so far?
I would say no movement, but as an industry, we have asked the federal government, including the various provincial and territorial governments, to consider a new framework for plastics, and on the other side of that, to support investment and innovation in technology.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Monsieur Saint-Pierre pour 5 minutes.
Merci, thank you. Si vous permettez,
Thank you. If you'll allow me, I'll be asking my questions in French. I want to make sure you have the interpretation. Mr. Murat, according to your most recent data, can you describe the level of concern that Canadians have in terms of plastic pollution? What do Canadians think of the ban on single-use plastics?
Consistently across any region, across any age group, gender, past voting history, it has showed since 2020 that this is an overwhelmingly popular opinion. It has never dipped below 80%. They support prohibitions at the source, like a single-use plastic ban, and they also support the federal government taking that role. And I do think the Federal Court of Appeal really affirmed that it is the federal government's responsibility. So this is a very widely popular issue.
Puis vous avez aussi, je pense,
And you also have a poll, Oceana Canada Plastic Market Research. Could you give us the result of that poll and briefly describe the results of that poll?
With that, we saw that 83% of Canadians supported the single-use plastic ban. That is 18 months after it came into effect. That is after Canadians saw plastic pollution reducing in their neighborhoods. It is very affirming that that was the correct choice. Canadians feel that way. And we showed that through non-biased polling, it came from across Canada. The highest support came from Quebec, with the lowest support, and when I say lowest, I mean 75% still in favor, came from Alberta.
merci. Donc, on a hâte de voir.
Thank you. So we're looking forward to looking at this report, this poll. Mr. Merant, there was also a report from Oceana in 2023, Breaking the Plastic Cycle. Could you also provide that report to the committee and also give a short summary of this report?
In English and French, so I can share it after this. But the main findings showed that over half of Canada's plastic pollution came from single-use plastics. The major sources of that single-use plastic pollution came from HORECA, which is a common acronym for hospitality, restaurants, and catering. Major retail and grocery outlets, beverage bottlers, and e-commerce were huge sources of there. I think the federal government was right to start moving on single-use plastics in those sectors, but the federal government, with the knowledge at the time, targeted products, as other countries and jurisdictions did. Now we have learned that through CEPA, you can actually have more wide-ranging definitions of single-use plastics. The federal government could expand the ban to include all on-site food and beverage orders. It could require reuse at things like major sporting and entertainment venues. It can expand its definition. So I look forward to the Supreme Court of Canada settling this and maybe a federal government approach that's more comprehensive, less product-based.
J'aurais peut-être une question pour vous, Madame Wersig.
Maybe a question for you, Ms. Wersig. Why is there so much opposition to the ban on single-use plastics? What are the groups or the interests of people who oppose it? Well, there's not a lot of opposition, but it's coming from the industry that's manufacturing the plastic in Canada and in the U.S., and that opposition probably is there to strengthen the industry, probably, without looking at alternatives. There's a company that's an American company that's producing glass jars in Montreal and in Toronto, in Brampton. And we could imagine a huge expansion of jobs in those two places if there were more glass products that would be reused 76 times, 15 times, or 20 times. And so the plastics industry is trying to protect its profits, but we're trying to protect the environment, and that's the difference. Maybe a last question. I have 30 seconds left. Ms. Versick again. Could you name Canadian organizations that support the Canadian action to ban the sale in the country of single-use plastics? Yes, I have a document that's in English only. Could you table it with the committee? With 52 organizations so far who have signed that they're in favor of protecting the ban on single-use plastics production and increase the products that are the object of this. So, Mr. Bonnet, now you have 2.5 minutes. In the same vein, could you also provide us with documentation on the negative effects on health? Because we didn't have time to discuss that. But if you have documents, that would be appreciated. Mr. Mirante, you or your colleague spoke about American interests. So, in your opinion, what we're seeing now, are we trying to please American interests, the gas and oil and petrochemical industry? Is that why Canada has decided to move back on the ban?
The Prime Minister's office into it, but what I can say...
C'est à vous que je pose la question.
Yeah.
But I'm asking you the question.
But what I can say is that in the courts, when it has gone to the federal court and the Federal Court of Appeal and the federal Supreme Court, American petrochemical companies and the American Chemistry Council have been involved in it and shown an interest to dial back our plastic regulation in Canada.
Merci. Rapidement, là, aux États-Unis, vous avez mentionné.
So briefly, I think you said that there are places like California, New York. So it's not everyone who doesn't is not in favor of this. Could you give us examples in the world? I'm thinking about France and in Europe. Give us where it's a situation of that's not. We're not just talking about Mr. Trunk, and I'll let my colleague.
And I'm going to put my questions to Ms. Wurzek, and I really wish I had time for everybody. But I want to try to drill down on what's been raised about food waste and how we'd have more food waste if we didn't have single-use plastics, and food and contamination, what it does to our health. So I quickly looked it up that North America, with lots of access to plastics for our food, wastes between 95 and 115 kilograms of food per capita, whereas places that don't use plastic, sub-Saharan Africa and Southeastern Asia, waste far less food, 6 to 11 kilograms a year. And I wonder if from your point of view, Ms. Wurzek, is there a plausible case that we need plastics to avoid food waste?
No, there's no global evidence to suggest that we need plastics to avoid all food waste. Plastics may be useful in certain cases. Why not reusable plastics instead of single-use plastics, where plastic is a good thing for meat, for example, right? But we know there's evidence that plastic contributes to food waste. Have you ever been to the store and bought 5 peppers instead of the 2 you need for your recipe because there wasn't any other option? 3 go bad in your fridge? Like, there is no single answer to this question, but it's...
And I can't pose the second part. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No problem. We'll now turn to Mr. Leslie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Wurzek, I'll continue on the path on food waste there, and it was mentioned the transportation, the lightness of plastic. You mentioned the difficulty in recycling some of these products, but, allegations that perhaps it is not as useful in food waste prevention. The government did consult on this idea not too long ago that we should be banning single-use plastics from grocery stores and including in food products. Should we be doing that?
No, sorry, the government did not consult on banning single-use plastics from grocery stores. The government consulted on a pollution prevention program, which would have required grocery stores to develop a plan to reduce plastics in their supply chains. And they could have adopted a number of different measures with the goal of reducing waste, which we believe is a priority those grocers share. There was no ban. There is no ban ability through that P2 plan of grocery stores that I think was mentioned earlier.
Should there be, though? Is that the approach the government should take?
I think certain nuisance plastics should be banned from grocery stores, and I think you would actually have the support of grocers and the support of recyclers to ban nuisance plastics that get in the way of collecting, sorting, and recycling other materials. I would say, I think Dr. Rockman mentioned it earlier, produce bags are a purely nuisance thing that I know at least one big grocery chain has tried to get rid of without success because others continue to use it.
I'd like to thank you for that. I'd like to switch over to Mr. Moffat on that because I appreciate the compost, the bag piece. And there was a story that came out a couple of years ago out of the Calgary specific co-op that developed a 100% compostable checkout bag that they later had to continue to pull from the shelves because the minister refused to change the rules that they had put in place on the ban. This makes absolutely no sense. This was a bag that was going to be able to be composted. It was innovation. To Mr. Moffat, does it make sense to punish a company that was trying to solve the plastics waste problem, such as this example?
The simple answer is no.
Now, I'd like to build on, in the last panel we talked a little bit about what the solution could be rather than an outright ban. So if the goal is to reduce plastic waste, would an option like you kind of outlined in your opening remarks, extended producer responsibility, better collection, better recycling, having some of these companies that are producing the products have the products be recyclable, the fact that that doesn't exist is not aided by a ban. So is there not a better approach that we could actually have the benefits of both food security, food safety, food length, and all of the other benefits accrued across society of plastics, but with a system that actually can enable economic growth throughout the recycling, sorting, system? Is there not a better way that we could be doing this rather than outright bans?
British Columbia is a good example. Now, they do have product bans as well, which industry is generally not supportive of. But I would say it's a systems problem, and that's the way to approach this. And, it's not just industry opposed to the federal government's action. Governments are involved in the legal suit as well because of jurisdictional authority. And ultimately the Supreme Court will decide. But, this is about collaboration. This is not just about industry. And my industry doesn't just produce straws and beer can holders. It's plastics that are used across the value chain. We represent converters. We represent recyclers. We represent technology developers and manufacturers, and we represent brand owners. So, this is not just about straws and other single-use items. This is about thinking about this issue from a systemic approach, and plastics are not the problem. It's what we do with them after they've served their useful purpose. That's the problem, and that's what we should focus on.
So how do we go about, so this is poorly designed, the ban process was poorly executed, hence why the initial court ruling was what it was. We'll wait and see what the Supreme Court has to say about it. But how do we walk this back? What is the off-ramp? Well, we can make it clear that the goal is not more pollution, that is not more plastics entering our environment, broadly speaking, but actually less waste, better environmental outcomes, and a better recycling system.
We are asking the federal government, along with the provincial governments, to consider federal legislation enabling circular economy, and for the federal government to set national standards. One of the ways you get more recycled content into the market is by creating demand for it and making it more economic, and that is the pathway forward. Provinces need to continue to move forward on extended producer responsibility, make it better, right? Make it more effective, and industry needs to continue to doing its part to innovate, design for recyclability, and there is a society issue here too as well as consumers. We need to become informed. Industry and governments need to help create that information, but we need to make better decisions about the things that we do with products, not just plastics, but products generally, once we're done with them.
Have you shared that plan, that alternative version of how this could work with the government, with the Prime Minister?
We did write a letter to the Prime Minister earlier this year. We sent it to the various premiers and territorial premiers and ministers of environment. We have not had a response from anybody, so it's not just a Prime Minister issue. We've talked to Environment and Climate Change Canada. They're interested. They haven't said no. They're open to a conversation. We've had conversations in Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. They're not opposed to it. They're interested in a conversation, but I mean, this is not a simple solution. It requires some focus and attention, and hopefully we'll get there.
It requires something more than virtue signaling.
Leslie, your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Watchorn for 5 minutes. I gave you a bonus minute.
Thank you.
So in Montreal, north of Montreal, we're ready to reduce plastics. We're pioneers there. And there's an organizer, we have Tricentrix. It's one of the storage center that's they've put in a place for glass. It's called micronization. It's put into concrete, and it's a good way of recycling glass. But even with all that technology, they weren't able to find a consistent market for plastic. And what I'm saying is people in my riding are really pioneers in the field. The city of Prévost, for example, decided to ban, with the businesses collaborating, containers for windshield wiper fluid. And the businesses were ready, citizens were happy, they installed filling stations. So we're starting to see that elsewhere in Quebec now. They also worked with restaurants, and I'd say that where we are, there are more restaurants by kilometer squared than anywhere else. And they put into place a program of reusable containers in restaurants. So people who leave with a doggy bag, it's no longer a plastic doggy bag. It's something that's reusable and that can be deposit refunded. And we're ready to reduce plastics more because less plastic is produced, the less will be in the environment. What's the next step? We have the plastics that are banned currently. You talked, for example, about bags for vegetables, for produce. Do you have other examples?
Sure. I work in English, and sometimes I forget the words of other things. First of all, we should, when I said nuisance packaging before, obviously fruit and vegetable produce bags would be a good thing to put on the list. Overwrap. Anything that is not necessary to contain a product that needs packaging, but rather to contain several packages together to make me buy more, get rid of it. Polystyrene and PVC in packaging. It's toxic and it really messes up recycling. If we want to have any plastics recycling at all, we have to get rid of that garbage out of our plastic products. We've also, I support very much Surfrider and Don't Mess with the Dawn in their quest to get rid of single-use coffee cups and lids. And actually what you talked about in Prévost, which is a reusable cup program, we're seeing that in Banff, we're seeing that in Whistler, we're seeing it in Winnipeg. Oh, well, that's a new one for me. So it's coming across the country. I think what the federal government can do is help municipalities build that infrastructure so that reusable cups that you can take back anywhere become the norm and we don't have all this garbage around.
Great. And actually we have that in a lot of our events too now, cups that you can go buy and then bring back. Mr. Morante, just a quick question. I want to talk about toxicity of plastic. You know, the Court of Appeals decision shows that overwhelming scientific evidence supporting the finding that plastic manufactured items were ubiquitous in the environment and have immediate or long-term harm. What are the harms that are being created here?
Yeah, you have both direct and indirect. So as a direct, you have the suffocation of marine life, you have the ingestion of plastics, which can contaminate seafood, that can be passed on through the food chain back to us. Plastic pollution does not stop at the shoreline, it can come onto our dinner plate. It can also degrade water quality, it can degrade critical ecosystems like kelp forests and coral reefs. But then you also have the chemicals that are in plastics. As mentioned before, there's a huge emerging sector trying to figure out both the ecotoxicity to wildlife, to water quality, but also people. And every week we're getting a new study coming out. I would really implore Environment Climate Change Canada to work with Health Canada to have a comprehensive understanding of what it's doing to our ecosystems, our food, our wildlife, and ourselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's good.
All right, well, that wraps up our session. Thank you so much to our witnesses for your time today. We really appreciate it. This was a one-day study, so pursuant to the motion, the committee can report its findings to the House. Is it the pleasure of the committee to proceed to the drafting of the report? Mr. Leslie?
Just curious, in the motion, the minister was invited, so just because she declined to come on the specific date we offered, she's not, is further invited to continue to conclude the motion as written?
I don't know. She wasn't able to attend on
today.
Today, yeah.
But shouldn't it be a more open invitation for her to? We were pretty specific. Like, can you come on June 11th? She said no. But
Yeah.
the motion was to invite the minister and have, I think, up to 2 meetings, if I recall, without having it in front of me. So I just feel like we shouldn't wrap it up until we give the minister an opportunity to come and talk to the committee.
Mr. Clerk,
I wish.
do you want to weigh in on the requirements based on the language of the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The enabling motion prescribed a study of one meeting, including an invitation to the minister to appear. The minister informed the committee that she's not available, and so we proceeded as we have today. And I'm happy to follow the will of the members, and I'm ready to take note, if that answers your question.
So really, so the.
Let's do it in the summer in your writing.
3 meetings a summer. 3 meetings a week, full summer.
If the committee would like to delay the beginning of the drafting of the report, the analysts don't need to start it. If you would like to try inviting the minister a second time at some later date, but it would be in the fall, so it would delay the finalizing of the report. But if that's within proper process and procedure, we can certainly do that. Is that something that needs to be voted on?
It only needs to be voted on unless it's the unanimous will of all members. If the entire committee agrees, then
I think we're done with this study and happy to table it. That's our position.
So that's not unanimous.
So then we'll take it to a vote.
It would need to be taken to a vote, yes.
Okay.
Madame la Présidente.
Oh, Monsieur Bonnet, je m'excuse.
Écoutez,
Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry. Well, there is a situation where we have witnesses who've clearly said that there are issues for health that are major health issues with suspending the ban on exports, problems for the environment as well. We would be ready to find an hour before next fall to be able to talk about it, because there are legitimate questions that need to be asked. We're here also to protect the health and the environment. If the minister wasn't able to make herself available, well, know that the Bloc is ready to make itself available well before September. So I'd be very open if we tried to convene her, to have the opportunity to have an hour to speak with the minister and talk about this important issue of health and environment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that was a very intriguing discussion over the 2 hours. There was things that were disclosed I had no idea about. It opened my eyes in terms of how bad this problem is, not just in Canada, but globally. But I think we've pretty much debated the full extent of Canada's ban and the exemptions on the ban and the export of pellets to other countries to produce products. But we haven't really gotten a clear answer in terms of Canada's global commitments, not just in terms of exports, but also in terms of importing products from different countries around the world that don't have the same environmental standards as us, and how is it can be compliant or actually consistent with what Canada has been proposing, as well as what Canadians want overall. So I'm in full favor of keeping us open until the minister actually comes to present as well.
Okay, let's take it to a vote. So all those in favor of delaying the drafting of the report and inviting the minister, please raise your hands. And those opposed?
Mr. Leslie has asked for a recorded division.
Oh, what do I do with that?
You give it
That's
to
my
me.
first one. Oh, thank you so much.
The question is on the motion by Mr. Leslie to prolong the study to allow for the minister to appear. Mr. Fanjoy. No. Mr. Grant. Mr. Greaves.
No.
Mr.
No.
Millette. No. Monsieur St. Pierre. No. Mr. Watchorn. No. Mr. Bexty.
Yes.
Mr. Leslie.
Yes.
Mr. Ross.
Yes.
Monsieur Bonin.
Pour la transparence, oui.
What about Mr. Gill?
I beg your pardon. Mr. Gill. Yeas 5, nays 6.
Okay, thank you very much, and we are now adjourned.